Leanne Kruger delivered the first child care credit in Pennsylvania history. She fought to decrease property taxes for our seniors and for new tax breaks for seniors. Leanne has delivered historic funding for Delco schools, for mental health programs, and school safety. Leanne Kruger is a strong voice for women against the extremists who want to take away our freedoms. Leanne Kruger, she listens, she works hard, she represents our Delco values.
Paid for by Leanne for PA.
Go.
All right. Good evening. My name is Andrew Nelson. And I'm Malcolm Yates. And we're the narrative. So we can jump right into it. So why the narrative?
Well, the reason why we call it the narrative is because, one thing that we always have an issue with is the narrative of who we are, the narrative of how they portray us, the narrative of what they represent us on TV. So what we want to do is we want to change that narrative. We want to be the creator of that narrative. And we want to make sure that we offer it so that the narrative fits us and it represents us the best way we know how.
Right. And that's us as
community and us just in general, every aspect of us.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so we just making sure that our narrative is told in our own language.
The way we need it.
The way we need it told.
Giving you the narrative of our community from the voices that means the most, you and us.
And so what do you think that, like, what is it that make us suitable to be able to talk this narrative?
Well, I think I'm suitable to change the narrative because, one, I feel like in my journey,
Right.
I'm always trying to make sure that I represent us in the first way. So just to give you a little bit of background of my journey, I grew up in the gun violence space and, the activism space where, back in '88, I was a victim of gun violence. I was shot twice and lost my little brother. There, my parents created a couple of nonprofits where we went ahead and started to go against gun violence, and we went to Harrisburg, we went to Washington, D.C., we spoke to the governor, to a couple presidents on how we can do better at gun violence. From there, I got the opportunity to work with our former state representative, and then from there, I was outreach director for Congresswoman Scanlon, and now I am heading government affairs for a nonprofit in Philadelphia doing the federal, city, and state government affairs.
That's a good to go. And so my background, I grew up in Chester in the early 90s and went into the Marine Corps in 2006. I spent 10 years in. While I was in the Marine Corps, I really wasn't very happy about the way things was going. I realized I needed to make a plan and like an exit strategy. So I started going to school. By the time it was all said and done, I ended up finishing with my MBA from Temple. Nice. While I was going to Temple and finishing undergrad, I was working for the Department of Veteran Affairs. That's kind of like how I got my feet wet and working in government. I learned the inner workings of budget management and operational management on the government level, constituent relations. I took that information as well as from graduating from school, and I went to work for a firm where we managed Yaden Borough. So that was kind of like my crash course in local politics. Learned everything from organizing, still doing the budgeting, managing the personnel at the city hall, just understanding the flow of the way things come, when people request things, when they need things, code violations, and I learned a great deal, right? And then now I currently work in the city of Chester in local government as well.
So it's safe to say that we have this experience working in pretty much every facet of government, from
Absolutely.
the municipal level to the federal level, even you servicing,
Right.
being in the service itself.
Absolutely.
And we able to provide that background and that viewpoint or that vantage point from
Right.
from our perspective, right?
Right. So we can have some conversations about things that happen politically that we don't normally talk about.
Yeah.
And a lot of people like to say like, oh, I don't really get involved in politics, but I don't know if I believe that, because I think we all involved in politics.
Yeah, man, because politics is involved in everything we do. Is in our
right?
culture. It defines some of our culture. Our culture defines politics.
Absolutely.
And if you thinking that politics don't matter, I really feel like you're sadly mistaken.
Right, because I mean, at the end of the day, we can all agree somebody's gonna make that decision. And whether you represented in that decision or not It's based on how you move in your politics.
And wouldn't you want the person making your decision be your pick?
Oh, hell yeah. So then how do we go about doing that though? Like how do we even parlay? Like what can the community get from our show to where we could even make that happen?
And that's what we're here for, right? I want people to understand that our pick needs to be someone that represents us.
Right.
They don't, hopefully look like us.
Right.
But damn sure have our best interests at heart.
Absolutely.
And the only way we can do that is what? Vote?
Well, so voting, but then voting with a strategy. And I not would go as far as to say that we're not really taught this, right? You might learn the basics of civics if you went to a high school that offered it, right?
Yeah.
You might learn something basic,
Yeah.
minimal,
Yeah.
right? But ultimately, we're not taught a lot of the political strategy or the ins and outs. So we're left with our own basic understanding, and usually it's a misunderstanding,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But I also think that that's the goal of people who want to broker power and stay in control, right? The less that they know, the better off. So if we can get this avenue to where we can get good information based on our life, our backgrounds, and our experiences, we can have these conversations that people don't normally have.
That's right.
We can explain some stuff that you might not have really understood.
That's right.
Give an opportunity for people to ask questions, and I think we could really start moving the needle on the progress of what we understand politically.
Yeah, because the narrative, what we're going to give you here, man, just is a place that we're going to discuss things that affect our community.
Yeah.
And then we're going to provide you with the information, the education, motivation that we all
Absolutely.
need. But we're going to put that in plain talk, like we sitting on the front porch or on your back porch, or we sitting there, chopping it up over, a nice beer or,
Right.
wine if you like wine or however you like to have it, man. But we want to give it to you in the plain talk so that you don't have to think about going back to civics class because,
Right.
I don't really want to go to civics.
Right,
neither,
nobody
bro.
wants that. But we could definitely have a good conversation that's politics as usual.
Politics
Right.
as usual.
You know what I mean? I like
I
that.
dig that.
And then the last thing I just want to talk about real quick, which is kind of like an introduction to what's going to be our first episode, is about voting.
Okay.
And, just so why is voting important, right? Like I start tossing these ideas around and I hear so much like, oh, my vote don't count. So I really kind of want to address that, right? Because that's a misconception that I think that people started this idea because they want to keep you not motivated,
Well,
right?
if it don't count,
Because if it don't count,
why are they keeping it from us?
why they keep trying to take it?
Every year, dog, you hear this every year about your vote counts, but then you also see rules, regulations, and policies put in place where they're trying to restrict you.
Right.
Right. You know
Matter
what
of
I'm saying?
fact, talking about that right now, it's not really publicized, right? The Voting Rights Act, the landmark legislation that our grandparents fought hard, got abused, got beat, got killed to make sure it got passed, right? One part of it already got pretty much taken away from the Supreme Court ruling, right?
Okay.
Which we talk about that. I'll go to quick details in a second.
Okay.
And then there's another part with the Supreme Court right now that's going to pretty much deliver the final blow based on their ruling.
You know what's funny? You said something's in the Supreme Court and it's sitting on the docket right now.
Right.
Where's this information at?
Right. Why is it not broadcasted?
Why we don't know anything about this?
But
man?
there's an opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Because now here we are, we got an opportunity where we could present this information. So real fast, the Supreme Court ruled that pre-clearance for changing a voting law no longer has to occur. So what does that really mean? Pre-clearance more or less is like a permission slip for a municipality at whatever level, whether it be state or local, in order for them to change the voting law, the federal government had to pre-approve it. Why did this happen? Because there were so many laws that was created to keep people from being able to vote, specifically ones that look like us, right? So the Supreme Court ruled that as unconstitutional, gave the power back to the states. So now that part of the law
So
is
now the
dead.
states can do what they want.
Well, not quite, because thank God there's one part of the law that's still standing.
Okay.
And that part of the law says that if the impact of the law disenfranchises a population group disproportionately, then that law is also unconstitutional. But here's the struggle, right? Right now, the same Supreme Court that overturned Roe versus Wade,
Okay.
and the same Supreme Court that gutted the pre-clearance act portion of the act is hearing an argument right now from Alabama, right? Alabama says, well, I thought we were not supposed to create laws based on race.
Okay.
That's their argument to the Supreme Court,
Okay.
right? So why are we having a protection in place based on race. Well, the reason is because of the impact, right? You might hear like, okay, well, we don't want to create laws based on race, and I agree with that, right?
Okay, that sounds good.
But if the impact of the law that's already on the books is affecting people by race, it's already about race.
Absolutely.
So that's the game, right? So why is it important to vote to tie it all back in? If the Supreme Court guts this last part of the legislation, the Voting Right Acts will no longer exist, right? So what does that mean for people that look like us? Well, in the southern states that we know that have historically taken people's vote away, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, right? What does that mean for them? That means that now their states will have control over making voting laws. So there's nothing stopping them from putting tests back into play like we used to have.
And then you say it's not based off race, but it can be based off economic standards. It can be based off geographic.
Whatever the state legislator decides.
Whatever they decide.
So if they decide that the test says how many steps is it to get from here to the courthouse, right? And the answer is 632 steps, right? But you only gonna know that answer if you one of the people that got told that answer. If you don't pass that test, you don't qualify to vote. You understand that?
Wow.
So now you will not be represented, and that'll be the law.
Wow. So they can even put educational standards in there. Like,
Absolutely.
oh, you got to have a high school diploma or a GED to vote.
Right.
Or you got to make a certain amount of money
Right.
to vote. Or you can't be on assistance to vote.
Right. So how does voting help us in this situation? Well, the good thing is the state legislators are a 1-for-1 vote.
Yeah.
Right. So as long as we have a voting block to where we could broker and say like, all right, we're not going to vote for this legislature, this person in the legislature, or we're not going to vote this person into the legislature if they not willing to run on a campaign where they're going to protect voting rights. But if we can't show up and vote and deliver an actual vote, then we're not going to have a political leg to stand on.
So that goes back to putting in people in place that represents us and
That's
have our
correct.
best interests. Going back to saying our vote matters because we be able to control.
Right. And it matters more now than ever because if we can't deliver enough votes to matter, then our voice is silent.
Wow.
Almost forever.
So can you imagine if we lose these seats or we put people in place in the state house? Let's just start locally, right?
Okay.
Because we're coming up on an election now. Can you imagine if this happens and we don't have the people that represents us
Right.
as our line of defense with the with that new legislation coming down, agreeing with those laws?
Right.
How fast that'll affect the community that we come from.
Right. I
So
mean, I
our
can see it as
state
clear
reps
as
going
day.
that way.
Right.
Our state senators going that
Right.
way, and then we also have a governor's race.
Right.
So if our governor's in line with that legislation,
Then
we
we in
lose
trouble.
seats in the Senate.
Right.
We lose seats in the
House.
Yep. How fast would cities like Chester, like Philly, like Harrisburg,
Right.
like Pittsburgh,
Right.
how quick would that be gutted when
Right.
it comes to the voting rights?
Right. So we need that it's going to be important to have this conversation when we start it. So that'll be our first episode.
Bro, I didn't even know this information. You dropped that on me, man. That's scary, bro.
It is.
It is.
But it's reality we dealing with. And I really think it's important that we get active today.
That's the key
Like
word,
right
get
now.
active.
Right.
We need to be active. That's
Yeah.
it.
Stats can't happen no
That's
more.
right.
Right. We
We
could be pissed off on the status all we want. Right now we losing real
You
life
can be,
ground.
you know what I'm saying? You can be a Facebook warrior or Instagram hero, but we got to get active. And that only works by actually doing something, man. Like it's cool to, we can go ahead and post something and tell it about it. I love that. Disseminate the information.
Right.
But we got to do something.
We got to do it.
Word.